This is Vonnie Battle again on my second episode of The Chapel, which also has articles that you can read and catch some of the video clips on Substack. Um, but today's episode is called, take my glasses off, it's called The Talk. Um, it's not the birds and the bees talk, is not, the talk about college and careers. I'm talking about that talk that every Black parent has to have with their children and especially their sons. I have two girls and one boy, all that were adopted out of foster care. And I'm crazy about my kids. I love them ridiculously. And but I went from no kids to three at one time. I had been a youth pastor, and now I'm a teacher as well. And I've done so many things with teenagers and with kids that I've seen a lot of tragedies and a lot of kids who are marked just because, they're just a regular Black kid. And so all parents have to have that talk. We had to have it in a sense. I think my parents gave a continuous talk, but I'm just at that point now that while I'm even doing this recording, I'm just mentally preparing myself to get ready to have this talk with my own son. As a government teacher, as an associate pastor, and as a single mom, I know that my son is walking into a country where the numbers say he's more likely to become up missing or jailed or killed than more of his class than many of his classmates. And I have to figure out how to tell him this truth without stealing his hope. So that's the talk. That's this episode. Just to give you an idea, I'm watching my son during the summer. I try to give my kids projects and different things to do to kind of keep them focused and keep that mind going before school starts back. And I'm watching him. He's just having a blast doing this poster, this project. He's learning ratios this year. He's going to middle school. He's 11 years old, and he's starting to grow, and he's starting to look a little bit older. And we know that as our young Black boys start a little bit older, that unfortunately they are seen as a threat or up to no good. And so I'm watching him, and he's just just like any other. He looks like any other kid. He's an American citizen. He's a student. He's a child of God. But I know that when some systems see him, they won't see him as a child. They'll see him as a suspect. They'll see him as a problem. They'll see him as a statistic. And as a single mom, I've watched enough classroom interactions and situations and heard enough stories, like we have heard some recently, to know that his skin color will often be read as evidence. And it'll be that evidence that he needs more discipline or that he's dangerous or that his mistakes are criminal and not just a child growing up. And in my situation, there's no backup parent. There's nobody to sit down and have this conversation with. So if I don't say it, it doesn't get said. So I'm asking myself, how do I prepare my son for systems that may not see him as a child at all? And how do I have this talk and still protect his joy? You know, um, like I said, many of us grew up with those talks, but nowadays that talk is how to move in stores, how to survive in encounters with the police, what to wear at night and what not to wear at night, how to keep your hands visible. It's become this survival training for young boys, young Black boys. But, I realize the talk cannot only be about, how not to get killed. It also has to be about how not to get lost in this system that would shape his life, discipline codes in schools and juvenile justice, and I used to speak in juvenile detention centers, and I would take a group of young people with me, and they would do some skits and acting, singing, rapping. I would speak, and it started to. It was a very emotional thing for all of us because you're seeing kids that look like your little cousin, your brother, your friend, and then you run into somebody and you're like, oh yeah, I know his parents, or and it's sad to see how quickly they just throw these young boys in jail for things that we know that other kids can get a slap on the hand or do some community service. The youngest child I ever seen in there was a 9-year-old little boy who happened to be in the car. I think he was with his brother or something, and he was in the car that was stolen. But he's 9 years old, and now he's sitting in jail. So it's things like that that I feel like I have to prepare my son for, to understand those things. Um, One of those things is how missing black kids get labeled as runaways, and it doesn't trigger any urgency. And I don't want to mention particular stories right now, but if you're watching this now, then you know of several that are out there that you're wondering what type of talk did the parents have with these kids that put them in these situations with groups of people who look at them a certain kind of way, that that they're suspicious, that they're violent, that they're angry, that they don't care about people or other things. They have no character, they have no morals, just because of the way that they look or the color of their skin. And and then unfortunately, let's go to church just a little bit. That the church version of the talk has been, child, just get the child saved and everything will change. And I believe in salvation, I preach it, you know but I have to say that getting saved changes his heart, but it does not automatically change the systems that grade his behavior, that police his neighborhood, or decide how urgently people respond if he goes missing. That gap is why we've kind of got to rewrite the talk. We live in a country where black youth are a fraction of the population, but a much larger share of missing kids. They're a larger share of locked juveniles in facilities, a larger share of victims to violence. Black boys are more likely to be reported missing, um, and less likely to get immediate intense response. Black boys are several times more likely than their white peers to end up in juvenile lockup, and more likely to be treated as adults before they are truly grown. Black boys and young men face higher risk of being killed, often by gun violence, in communities that have been shaped by racism and neglect. So when I sit down with my son, yeah, I'm anxious. I'm responding to the reality that I see in my community, in the classroom, in my country, the stories of other parents, the things that we see on the news. As a single mom, if I don't have the talk, then I leave him unarmed. I don't prepare him for the world that he's going into, and I don't prepare him for a battle that he don't even know that he's fighting. But if I only teach him to survive, I risk training him to see the world as something to endure, to barely make it through, and not something that he can help change. I want to start with dignity, rewriting the talk, souls and systems. Let's put on my pastor hat for just a moment. For a moment, I believe my son is made in the image of God. Every black boy in every classroom, on the street, in this country, they're what I call image bearers. That means that they carry the image of God. We are created in his image. That means that talk that we have has to start with that dignity, not the danger. I don't want his first deep conversation about race and systems to be, boy, they might kill you. They gonna throw you in a lake. They gonna cut you up, or they gonna put you in jail. I want it to be more like, son, God has stamped his image on you. You are more than what this world system says about you. I want him to understand that he's a reflection of God's creativity and his glory. And before any school, any cop, any judge, any statistic, God has already said, son, you matter. Nothing that happens in this country can erase that. And then add the reality. Yes, there are some systems that are unjust. Yes, some people will see you through fear before they see you as a child. But I can frame the conversation more like not because you're weak or you're doomed, but because you're powerful and valuable. And I refuse to let you walk blind. The talk itself is hard truths. We got to give the hard truths about the world that we live in, the country that we live in. There are systems in this country that will not give him the benefit of the doubt. You know, um, on the street, you may be seeing him as older. He's like I said, he's growing. He's taller. I can see him now walking down the street with a hoodie on, and someone mistaking him for robbing something, or whatever the case may be. But I have to have those talks with him. I've got to be real with him. You know why? Because in the end, when we have these talks, we just want our child to come home. I just want you to make it back home. And these are things what other people feel. We can't control those things. There are ways that we can fight it and we can move forward in it and we can fight against it. But at the same time, I don't want to scare him, but I don't want him walking blind. And I want to use wise, gentle wording. I want him to recognize the mistreatment and also know how to move in those moments to protect his life. We talk about how to speak to adults and how to handle police encounters, but I want to push beyond that. I want him to not only be prepared to survive these systems, but to go to help change them, to prepare to change them. And that's why even in the car in our family, we talk about the government in in the car. We talk about voting. We talk about leadership. We talk about policy. We talk about things so that they would understand how voting matters, how protesting matters, and how to do those things and still protect themselves. The talk is not only don't die, it's also live in such a way that other boys won't need this same conversation in the same way. The church community, it needs to focus more on, a strategy that's not just, hey, get these boys saved and everything will change. Salvation matters. It changes hearts, choices, but salvation alone does not rewrite school policy or reform in juvenile sentencing or fix how missing kids are treated. As a single mom, I don't just need a church that cares about my son's soul. I need a church that will stand up for his life, his education, his safety, and his future. And here's the thing I want us all to feel. If the gospel we preach doesn't move us to protect Black boys, we're not preaching the full gospel. The full gospel means we care about his eternity and his tomorrow, his prayer life and his school record, his walk with God and the block that he walks down. I need churches that don't just analyze the crisis of Black boys, but come alongside Black moms who are doing this work largely alone, mentoring, tutoring, showing up in court, at school board meetings and at City Hall. And our faith has to have feet. We got to walk in it. We've got to show them the resolve. So while I'm recording this, I just want to keep in mind that, as I sit and have this conversation with my son, I don't want it to be just for my house. I want it to be for parents, for teachers, for anyone who cares about our Black boys and the systems that we live in. Here's the resolve. I will not send my son into this world naive about the systems he's walking through. I will not let fear be the only note I hit when I talk to him about being Black in America. I will not accept a version of faith that ignores the structures hurting the kids I teach and the child that I'm raising. I want the talk to become something deeper. Son, here's the truth about the world that you live in, but also here's who you are to God. Here's how you protect yourself, and here's how together we can build something better. So if this episode is stirring something in you as a parent, bracing for your own version of the talk, if you're a church leader realizing your gospel has been too small. If you're a teacher tired of watching these systems break our kids, I want you to sit with this question. What would it look like for me to help make the talk unnecessary for the next generation? If we confront systems, preach a whole gospel, and build just policies, maybe our grandsons and granddaughters won't need this conversation in this form. They'll still need wisdom, they'll still need guidance, but they won't need a survivor manual just to walk down the street. That's the future that that I'm praying for, that I'm seeking God for. That's the future I'm working toward and working hard with our children, with leaders, with parents to change the way that we have to have these talks.